Who is that?
Work. It looks like they have another problem I gotta go fix.
3 o'clock.
I know. Sorry.
You get paid the big bucks.
Over 3 decades ago, I started an amazing adventure as a software developer at one of the best times to be starting out in the IT industry, an industry that would allow me to do and experience things that I could never imagine. Unfortunately, what I didn't know is what it would truly cost. When I started out in the IT industry, I was excited to be part of it. It was truly an amazing time. Everything was new and evolving. We had the race for who could create the fastest processors, the least expensive hard drives, and who could make the most affordable memory. It seemed like every month a new company was showing up that was selling their version of the PC. Of course, many of us were just building our own. We had Microsoft, IBM, and Apple amongst others trying to create the perfect operating system. I mean, anybody remember IBM and Microsoft's joint venture for OS/2? There were times that you just had to make light of things because there was just so much going on. I remember one day a workmate of mine and myself were jokingly trying to convince his manager that we needed a SGI Onyx. So, that we could produce more convincing 3D models of the buildings and roads that the engineering team was designing. And that we really, really wanted to get into exploring this whole SGI virtual reality thing. We told him it was just a small investment of $200,000, not really a big deal. Additionally, we told him that we would, stop bugging him about, what he referred to as rammy jammies. I mean, everybody knows more memory is king, right? So shortly after that, there was a Dilbert cartoon that showed up where Dilbert had gotten approval for a 286 to do 3D rendering with. Ratbert stated that should be sufficient. Besides, how many times would you be doing 3D rendering in your career? Dilbert responded with, once, if I hurry. And that statement stuck with me forever. As far as the comic strip, someone, and I'm not naming names, may have taken and blown that comic strip up on a photocopier and stuck it outside that manager's cube. During that time, I would spend nights and weekends at home learning more and more about programming and learning about this new thing called the internet and how to access things like online bulletin board systems or, BBSs, until those were replaced with services like AOL and Prodigy, which in turn were replaced by Yahoo, Netscape, and Internet Explorer. It only made sense that I start out learning things like HTML and DHTML and this little thing called ISAPI, or as we commonly referred to it as IZAPI. It was an exciting and ever-changing time. Regardless of what you were doing, if you were writing code, you were on the cutting edge because, frankly, that's all there was. Everyone was just trying to figure it out, and there were companies out there buzzing with energy and excited to capitalize on all of us. After all, we were changing the world, one line at a time. It seemed like those companies really cared about us. With free drinks at most businesses, some had free food, others would bring meals in each day for lunch and sometimes for dinner. Over time, though, we started to learn the truth about the industry. Months prior to the dot-com bust, there was evidence of the way the IT world really was. I remember a manager telling me about having an interview with a relatively new startup at the time and then showing her where her cube would be. It had all the typical things that you would expect, plus one additional item, a cot. The expectation for the job was a minimum of 50 hours a week, which included having to work some weekends. After all, you cannot change the world if you're not putting in the hours necessary to make that happen. I think, as I remember, she took that job because it was more pay would lead to more opportunities down the road and all the other benefits. Also, in truth, she really had no loyalty to us. We were just a stop on her journey to wherever she was headed, which, unfortunately, as time passed, seemed to become the norm. The rule of the pre-dot-com bust time was that if you wanted a pay increase, you just simply went and worked for another company, which meant that really the workforce for the places that you were working at became more and more transient. It wasn't long after she left, perhaps roughly the same time that the company that I was working for folded. It was another situation where upper management had hedged their bets on a technology or an emerging industry and just simply chose wrong. Honestly, this wasn't the first time I'd experienced a scenario. The first company that I had worked for as a software developer folded not long after I got promoted to being a software developer, which, to be honest, was probably a foreshadowing of the future. The nature of the industry was always fluid, with companies folding all the time and rifts happening because the businesses failed to meet stockholders' expectations. It was far easier to lay off a percentage of the workforce than it was to admit you misjudged the industry or really had no clue to start with, and probably shouldn't have been in the position of defining the direction of the company in the first place. And the dot-com bust, well, that didn't help things at all. It made things so much worse because now people that had jobs were willing to put in the extra hours and spend the time outside of work learning new things so they could stay competitive to ensure that they kept their jobs. For those of us that were out there looking for work, well, prior to the dot-com bust, you might have one or two candidates looking to fill that same position. But now, after the dot-com bust, you had 10, 30 or more people vying for the same position. Today, things are different. I mean, the excitement and the energy of that time period is gone, and really, ever since the dot-com bust, it just seems like companies don't care about their employees anymore. I mean, they might use fancy buzzwords like work-life balance and offer unlimited vacation. But if there's a financial downturn or the company fails to hit their targets, what decision do you think they're going to make? I mean, after all, you're just an employee, and it's the nature of the industry. The big problem for me today is the cost of being part of the industry. Anymore, it's really just work. You do enough, well, actually you do more than enough to keep your job and keep succeeding at your job. Pretty much everything for me has centered around that because of my experiences over the last 3 decades. On more than one occasion, I was all in, climbing the corporate ladder, proving that I was a highly valued employee, only to end up out on the street looking for work. It was never because I failed. It was either because of the result of risks or because the business simply went under. The effect of being without an income and having a family that could no longer provide for was devastating. I hadn't just failed myself, I'd failed them. And in the worst cases, when other people had to come to our aid to help keep the utilities on and help make sure that the family was fed, and in the worst of situations, help ensure that we didn't get cast out on the street, my attitude changed. It hurt me so much when my wife at the time had to enroll in special programs to help ensure that our kids would have food and get the medical attention that they needed. It was embarrassing. It wasn't embarrassing because of the situation. It was embarrassing to me because I had put my family in that situation. Going forward, I understood that no job was safe, and I grew callous with all the company's broken promises and endless rhetoric. No longer trusted management, especially upper management. And what once had been a career turned into nothing more than a job. One that I knew sooner or later I'd be looking for another one. More than anything, I was concerned about making sure that I was always providing for my family, even if it meant it seemed most of the time I was absent, away working, or off in a room learning something new, or trying to simply find a better, more stable job. In time, though, all that fell apart. Everything just crumbled. I wasn't really there. So in some ways, you could say my family just simply moved on without me. And honestly, who could blame them? I'd failed them on more than one occasion. I never made it, so there was absolutely no security. I was gone all the time working. Simply, I was more worried about making sure I was providing for them than them. I would love to say that after my family kind of splintered or completely splintered, that I had a new perspective on things, but that simply wouldn't be true. All I saw was that I had more bills to pay, and yeah, I was having to deal with another riff. Honestly, I had really had no clue what was next. You could say I was probably at my lowest point of all the lowest points that I'd had. And it took nearly a year to get a job after that rift. It wasn't for lack of looking. I was applying at companies all over the place. Interviewed for a development opportunity in Florida. Of course, that didn't pan out. I exchanged a few emails with an HR person in Christchurch, New Zealand, of all places, and another one in Hawaii, and they didn't work out. And that doesn't include the hundreds of positions that I applied for locally. I mean, after a while, getting told by a company they had decided to go with a different candidate and pass on you wasn't just the norm, it was just expected. I did consider just switching careers to something different altogether. Perhaps I'd become a chef. And actually, I looked into that, and it was going to cost more money than I could possibly afford at the time. I also thought about just like packing everything up and going and getting lost in the world. Because, I mean, really, I'd lost pretty much everything, or was going to be losing everything anyways. So, I mean, there wasn't much left. The ability just to pack up and go seemed a lot easier and a lot safer than just dredging through it all. I was a broken person. I was consumed with anger and depressed and fear and just all sorts of stuff. It got to a point where it was so bad I simply couldn't be a father anymore. I mean, the kids would come over, but I just would end up locking myself in my room. I couldn't face them. I'd failed them. I couldn't be a dad to them anymore. I was worthless. Inside, I was a loser. I just failed them. And it wasn't fair to them. It just wasn't fair. So many fights, so many things that should never have happened. All that broke their trust in me, pushed them away. It was literally one of the worst times in my life. And I'm sure that it wasn't the best in theirs either. Thing is, I mean, stealing from the metaphor of the phoenix rising out of the ashes, in my own way, eventually I rose out of my own pile of ashes. My relationship with my ex was better than it had ever been in years. I know in many ways because of my wife and the weird relationship that she has with her ex and ex's side of the family. The relationship with my daughters was better than it ever was. Ever. The only kind of holdout in this whole thing is that the relationship with my son is still fractured. And it may always be fractured. I hope one day that will change. I really do. It's funny. Today, we get together as a family. My ex, my kids, my son's, he's off doing what he's doing. So he can't be part of our family gatherings. But for our family gatherings, it's so weird to see my ex and my wife hanging out together like they're fast friends. It's a little creepy, to be quite honest. So here's the thing. I finally got to a point that I was working for a company where you could say that I finally made it. All those things that I had looked for in a company, a strong potential for stability, no longer having to work like stupid crazy hours, 60 to 90 to 80 hour work weeks or more. I'd finally gotten to a better place. However, by the time I'd gotten there, I was broken and disillusioned by the industry that 3 decades earlier I was so eager to be part of. I knew that this time, this was probably going to be my last ride. I'd had enough of doing what I had done so many times before. Build a team, create something magical. But I didn't have the desire to continue to support it once it was done, or be there through multiple iterations until it was beyond world class. I just wanted to build a framework, provide guidance, lay out a future path, and let others take ownership of it. I was done with support calls, people complaining about this thing or that thing. I was done with busting my butt and having my team bust theirs to feel like nothing we did was appreciated. Instead, we would just get complaints, more service tickets, and end up having to work more late nights and weekends. But still, the fear of not having a job or to having to start over and build another team, create another brilliant product, kept pushing and striving me to be my best. To suck it up and put on my big boy pants and just deal with it. Honestly, one day I started looking at the work choices my daughters were making. They weren't bad, but I could easily see that those choices were going to be taking them down similar paths that I had taken. I explained to them that in this day and age, there were different options. They didn't have to choose the path that their dad went down. Not that they wanted to be software developers or anything like that, but still, they didn't have to choose those paths. They could look at different ones. But I guess honestly, my words sort of fell on, deaf ears, because what track record did I have to prove to them that there was a better way? I only had, the fact that I failed and kept going and just struggled through it. That's not life. That's struggling to live. So it only made sense that while I was on top, when I finally made it, it was time to quit. It's easy to say I quit and just leave it at that. Or to say I quit because I needed something different. In reality, for me, it's about gaining something back that I lost. Actually, multiple things that I lost. My decision to leave the IT industry and go full-time as a creator might appear on the surface to be a high-risk or even crazy decision. But as I break it down in this video, it feels like the best way for me to gain those things back.